Hi and welcome back to my studio. Today I'd like to share with you a video from last year that I really enjoyed painting, something a little bit different that I'm hoping that you'll really enjoy. And maybe I'll get back into doing some similar things to this again sometime in the near future. Let me know what you think. But first, a quick peep at my new book, Landscapes in Watercolour, Tips and Techniques for the Complete Beginner, which is now available to order or pre-order, depending on where in the world you are and which shop you choose. Hi, and welcome to Lois and Morgana Davidson Art. It's Lois here, and today I'm going to be painting this beautiful old boat, just sort of moored up at a jetty. I'm going to be using quite a limited palette, mostly just blues and a nice warm burnt sienna, and then finishing it off with some white gouache at the end. This is the photograph that I used for inspiration. It's from the royalty-free site Pixabay, and I shall leave a link to the photograph in the description below the video. I changed the aperture of my paper with masking tape, making it slightly smaller than my usual size. So it's a piece of modified 11 by 15 inch or 28 by 38 centimetre paper that I've just brought the edge in to the left and brought it down a little bit from the top. I've drawn out my boat roughly and my jetty, and I'm going to paint most of it in wet to start with. So I'm using my Princeton Aqua Elite 1.5 inch synthetic modeler brush. You can use any wash brush to wet the page all over. I don't want my page to be absolutely saturated and swimming with water, but I do want the water to soak in so that I can paint wet for quite a long time. I'm using Saunders Waterford cold press paper. It's 100% cotton and it's well known for staying wet for quite a long time. It should stay open and usable and paintable for at least half an hour. Today, for a change, I'm painting flat on my desk. And I'm going to be laying in my washes, my initial washes, all of them, while the board is flat, because I don't want the washes to move. I want them to soften and diffuse wet, but not to run down the page. I'm using an Escoda Ultimo size 14 mop brush to lay in a mixture of Prussian blue, cerulean blue, a bit of cobalt blue, and a bit of neutral tint. In various strengths, so that I'm varying up the tones very slightly, and I'm going to grey the colour out with a little bit of, or neutralise it with a little bit of burnt sienna into the mix here and there. All my brush strokes at this stage are horizontal, so I can keep the orientation and the flatness of the water and begin to build up some sort of very soft, subtle light across the surface of the water and ripples, etc. This is a bit of burnt sienna, which is just going to be coming in over the jetty where there's quite a lot of light. So I want to get that light glow into that area, into my wet wash to start with. So again, changing up the hue very slightly with either darker or lighter mixes of this lovely blue colour. And you can see that I'm beginning to build up. That's some more of the cerulean blue, much stronger, into the mix. And a little bit of, I think, cobalt turquoise, and which gives me that lovely colour of the underside of the bow of the boat. And then coming back in with grey and getting that sort of grey in for the shadows around the edges of the boat. Everything's still softening and diffusing, and so I'm trying to sort of just get in all my base colours for my lights and my mid-tones. And just a stronger bit of burnt sienna where there's all that sort of the rusty poles and old mooring ropes and bits of seaweed hanging off the jetty. Putting a little bit more grey and a bit more of this warmer grey with burnt sienna across the water, keeping with my horizontal brush strokes, keeping it nice and flat, and then trying to put in a little bit of warmth across the top of the water, where just out of sight there is the reflections of something else, probably another jetty that's not in the photo frame. So I want to try and get just an indication of that into the water behind the dinghy. So I'm just bringing that colour in and hoping it will just soften back and diffuse. But I'm not too worried about that. My focus is the boat and the jetty. So trying to get some of the colour inside the boat, which seems to have sort of either some piles of tarpaulins and things like that in it, and ropes. Not really sure what's in the boat, but I'm just making sure that I try and get the colours just about right. But mostly I'll be working on building up the correct tones. The angle of the boat is quite interesting. It's very foreshortened, so it's a difficult shape to draw. If you're trying to sort of just draw it like a boat, you have to draw the shapes as you see them in order to get that kind of distorted look of foreshortening, so that we're drawing it more like a sort of an oval than a classic boat shape. But hopefully as I build up the tones then the foreshortened form of the boat should begin to appear, and we should begin to see that we're looking at it sort of front on. So I'm building up my shadows now as well in the ripples, and I hope you can see that everything is drying back much lighter and much softer. So what seems like quite sort of drastic applications of paint at some point softens back and just blends into the whole. So really this is still very much the background wash that I'm working on, and I'm just continuing to build up little by little and using slightly drier mixes of paint. And as the page itself slowly begins to dry, then those stronger washes will stay put. They'll still soften and diffuse, but they will stay there a little bit stronger, and so that my mid-tones, and I'm starting to get in a few of my darker tones, and these will just soften and diffuse and give me a really nice base on which to put a little bit of detail, wet on dry later on. So I'm trying to get in my darks now. On the right side of the bow of the boat, it's completely in shadow. I've got some shadow top left inside the boat. Just those sweeping curves have helped me to begin to show the shape of the boat. And now I'm trying to get in just a little bit of that, all the rope debris and sort of seaweed or algae or whatever it is that's growing off of the jetty. And my paper is still wet because I soaked it thoroughly before I started. And all the washes that I've been applying are wet as well, and that's adding to the wetness of the paper. And the washes are mostly all over the page. I'm covering everywhere in this wet in wet wash. There's no unpainted paper this time at all. It's all been painted over, and everything is just softening and diffusing. But certain parts of it will begin to dry soon. For example, the top area of the water is drying off, so I'm not going to be doing any more to that, and I'll just continue dropping in and sharpening up some of the tone and some of the shapes and shadows in the boat. And as I do this, I'm painting with slightly drier mixes of paint each time. If my brush and paint is too wet, I'll dab it onto a towel or a sponge to remove the excess moisture, so that I'm going on to the wet page or the damp page with fairly dry paint now. If I was to introduce wet paint or a wet brush into these sort of gently drying washes, then I risk getting cauliflowers or strange marks. So I'm keeping my paint mixes and my brushes nice and dry. So I'm just painting in the position of my mooring rope, and I want that to show up white against the shadowy side of the hull of the boat. So once that's dried off a little bit more so that the paint is just moist or damp, I'm going to use my palette knife and scrape through the paint to reveal a lighter rope which stands out and then pushes the hull of the boat back. And then I can do the same around the jetty, just to pull out some lighter ropes, little bits of seaweed, debris, whatever it is, sort of hanging off the jetty. And I can also do the same and just scrape a few lighter highlights around the coils of rope in the back of the boat and the rope that leads through the loop on the front of the boat through to the jetty. So that's the wet in wet underpainting finished, and I really enjoyed painting that. It took quite a while. The paper stayed wet enough for long enough, which is one of the reasons I use Saunders Waterford paper, and it was a lot of fun. So I'm hoping that the washes will dry and soften and give me a great base just to add a little bit more detail wet onto the dry painting and finish the painting off. So I'm going to go off and have a cup of coffee and leave it alone, and try not to touch it because it looks nice and fresh. If I do any more to it, then I run the risk of overworking it. So here it is, nice and dry, an hour or so later, and my board is now put back to its normal 45 degrees. Not that I need gravity to help me to paint, but that's just the angle that I like to paint at to keep me nice and loose. So I'm going to be using my Escoda size 14 Perla synthetic round brush for most of the detail here. It's got a lovely point and it really is nice to work with, and will help me to get in my darks. So I'm just putting in sort of the shape, the moulding around the top of the boat. And this is neutral tint, which has been mixed with my blues, and that's a bit of Prussian blue, cobalt blue, and a bit of burnt sienna. And I'm working around my rope shape so that I'm leaving that showing through the dark. That hopefully should really work to push out the shape of my boat and to bring my rope forward to the jetty. And then continuing with the same dark to paint the shadow of that really dark part of the boat. I'm keeping it vertical, and as I'm painting with wet paint onto a dry painting, I'm not getting any softness or diffusions. Everything that I paint now has hard edges, so I have to soften back anything that I need. So the shadow or the reflection is going to look really hard edged and a little bit wrong at the moment to start with, but I'm just getting in the shape, making sure it really is nice and vertical down from the prow of the boat. Excuse me, and then I shall soften it in places and blend it into the rest of the sea. When you work wet in wet, everything will soften and blend because the paper's damp. But when you're working with wet paint onto a dry page, any softening and blending you have to do yourself. So this is my 3/4 inch Cotman one stroke flat brush, and I'm using that to pull some of the paint from that reflection into the water on either side. So I'm moving the paint around, softening those edges a little bit more and helping to blend the shadow into, or rather the reflection, into the water a bit. So now using this stronger blue, which is a mixture of cerulean blue with a little bit of cobalt turquoise, to get the reflection into the water of the painted hull of the boat. Again, softening as I go, blending it in, trying to make sure that I get a fairly sort of seamless reflection join between the dark and the blue, but keeping it so that it looks natural, so it comes down from the right place, if you see what I mean. And keeping those sort of horizontal side-to-side brush strokes running through different colours and shades of paint in the water in order to create that sort of natural toned ripple shape. The horizontal brushwork keeps the water flat. I can work up a little bit higher behind the boat now, just adding in a few more of these horizontal marks. Don't want to overdo it. I want to keep this fairly simple. I think I've almost achieved the effects that I want. So I don't want to risk overworking it because it's already a little bit close to that. So I'm going to move back into the boat and just finish off some of the areas. I want to use a fairly neutral grey to sort of put in the structure of the boat a little bit more firmly, and some shadows where the planking is, the sort of shapes that curve around the outside of the boat. And then just a little bit of something and nothing detail inside the boat, building up a little bit of tone, a little bit of shape to the colour that's already there, with burnt sienna, neutral tint, a little bit of cerulean blue, cobalt blue mixed with the Prussian blue too, the same colours that I've used everywhere else, but just in differing amounts. And then a bit more of this lovely neutral grey around the contents of the boat, on this lighter side of the boat. I think I'm going to be putting a bit of white gouache on there at the end, just to lighten up that side a little bit more. But hopefully now you're starting to see the foreshortened shape of the boat appearing with a little bit more depth and form. Then adding some shadow and shade to the jetty, trying to work and sort of negatively paint around some of the colour that's there already, to leave some of that showing and to help the ropes and things on the jetty to emerge. Sort of dipping in again into a bit more burnt sienna for that sort of rusty look. Making sure that some of it's reflected as well. And then getting in some nice strong darks here and there in the jetty for shadows. to really help pop out the shape of the rope and the shape of all the little ropes and sort of seaweed and stuff like that hanging off the jetty. Then just a few more darks on the boats. So I'm darkening up the hull on the shadow side to show the darker blue paint at the bottom. Just a little bit of a dark line at the waterline there, which I can just smudge out, soften it a bit, but make sure it's there. And now for some white gouache to bring in some highlights. Just brighten up a few little highlights here and there, and this sort of tangle of rope. The rope coming forward and through that little loop at the front. Cross over the dark shadowed area and up to the post on the jetty. It's just a few highlights here and there, just the lighter the light, the more it makes the darks stand out and pop. I can just get a few light highlights into the water. The white gouache always sort of dries back lighter, so it won't look quite as overt as that in the finished painting. And if I want any brighter highlights, I can go back in and brighten them up again at the end. Just where the light is catching the edge of the boat. Again, making the darker tonal value areas stand out a bit more. I'm using a small calligraphy brush for this, but any brush with a small sort of good point will do for these finishing touches. And then a little bit of shadow in and around the reflections, keeping that horizontal orientation to the tips of the flat brush. Then just a bit of dry brush on the hull of the boat, just to sort of age it a little bit, give it that kind of weathered look. And then a few more darks inside the boat, helping to push out the hull of the boat on the outside. Just deepening up the shadows. Just working around the paint that's already there and just building up a little bit more complexity to it. So just a few finishing touches. Just making sure my suggested details are picked out and my values are balanced. And to that end, a bit more white gouache, another layer on the edge of the boat where it's dried back. Don't want it really bright, but just want it to pop out the shape of the boat a bit more. Just catching some highlights on the planking. And I think I'm just about done. I think I'm more or less happy leaving this painting where it is. And here you see it with the tape removed. And That gave me the chance to see it with fresh eyes and to realise I just need a few more little touches on the jetty just to get those ropes and bits of seaweed to stand out even more. Not too much, then softening things back, smudging it in. Just making sure the mooring rope really stands out nicely and leads the eye through the painting from the jetty to the boat. Then maybe some more darks against the lighter side of the boat where the light's catching it, but just below the rope, and that helps that rope to pop out a little bit more. And I think I just want to go a little bit darker on the shadow side, just to finish this off and to really push that part of the painting back. So working around the rope again, keeping that nice and pale where it comes out in front into the sunlight where the sun's hitting the jetty, and catching the rope, which is one of the items that I thought was most attractive about this. Just a little last bit of shadow in the reflection or shading. The shadow side of these oar supports. Sharpening up a few edges here and there. And finally a couple of dark touches in the water. And I'm going to call that finished. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I really enjoyed painting it. It was a bit different for me. I usually paint a lot looser than this, even though there are some loose elements to this. Parts of it had to be fairly tight in order to get them to work in the painting. And I think some parts are more successful than others. Overall, I'm really pleased, but it's taught me a lot. With painting, we only really learn through sort of trial and error, and I've really enjoyed playing around today, and I'm really looking forward to trying something like this again and putting into practice the things that I've learnt. So thank you so much for watching. Please leave us a like and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and click on the bell icon if you want to see when we publish new videos. And thank you so much to everyone that supports us on Patreon. We really do appreciate every single one of you. So I'll see you again soon. Take care and happy painting. Bye.